I spent the last 3 weeks researching the Bioware update in hopes of finding the answer to one question. Where is Mass Effect 5? This is part 2 of that series. In part 1, we went over the studio update in great detail, breaking down everything that was said. We also identified why the scope of Mass Effect 5 has definitely shrunk. I highly recommend watching that video first. But if you're ready for part 2, settle down, grab a snack, and let's talk about the Veilguard Layoffs and all the teasers we've gotten about Mass Effect 5 so far.
Preface this section, please remember that we're talking about very much real people with families, lives, and whole entire worlds to uproot and change now that they have been ousted from Bioware. While I do want to discuss this topic because it is important and a significant reason that factors into my expectations for Mass Effect 5, I want to keep this conversation focused specifically on the role changes and give a little bit of respect and privacy to those who are personally affected by these changes. Games and entertainment are really fun and all, but let's keep our comments kind when we're discussing these role changes. So, Bioware is no stranger to layoffs. Seemingly, in coupling with this latest update, Tick Weeks and Karen Weeks have left the studio for different projects. Previously in 2023, Mary Kirby and Lucas Chris Jansen. My heart truly does go out to these developers, and I have nothing but respect and admiration for everything that they've accomplished through their passion and talent. I mean, these folks were responsible for significant popular characters and the writing behind most of the Dragon Age and Mass Effect series. I personally have to thank them so much for even getting me my start into the games industry. If it wasn't for their writing in these games, I would have never even considered trying to land a job here, and so I thank them for that. When we move past that human-to-human appreciation though, and we start to put on the glasses of seeking the future to Mass Effect 5, I'm going to be a little bit controversial. I don't think that moving away from using long-tenured writers is a bad thing for the future of Mass Effect 5. While it's a gut punch that long-time Mass Effect and Bioware writers in general are not going to be involved with the writing in Mass Effect 5, I speculate that they were actually never really involved with the development of the game to begin with. While there is a high possibility that folks like Tick Weeks and Chris Jansen were consulted for their subject matter expertise in Mass Effect 5, I don't think that Mass Effect 5 was formed on their vision. Here's why. Typically, projects receive their own separate funds. These funds are used to cover each project's expenses relating to that project. Essentially, anything in pursuit of the project falls underneath that one project's budget. Veilguard's budget is entirely separate from Mass Effect's budget, and they don't want to cross-contaminate that. If you're paying for an employee to work on Veilguard and they go and work on Mass Effect 5, well, they're being paid out of Veilguard's funds to support Veilguard's development, not Mass Effect 5. If anyone is hired under Veilguard, it's highly unlikely they're doing any long-term or significant work to support another project. So Tick Weeks, associated strongly with the Veilguard project. It's much more likely they would have kept Tick as well as the recent departures from Veilguard completely within Veilguard's ecosystem. That means if we see people who are leaving the project who were originally working on Veilguard, they probably had nothing to do with Mass Effect 5. Nothing significant, I might say. As a game, in this case Veilguard, gets closer to release, all hands need to get on deck, potentially lending a person or two from another project in order to support the overall studio's goals. This is where things get a little squishy. But if Veilguard is the one that's trending towards release and drawing in all the other resources, suffice to say, there's not really a reason they would send on anyone from Veilguard to work in any capacity on Mass Effect 5. The only exception I can think of is to consult as a subject matter expert. What that means is if there was somebody on Veilguard who worked a lot on character customization in the original Mass Effect series, they may have brought that person over to create some foundational documents or guidance on how to reproduce that feature in Mass Effect 5. But that person themselves, kind of unlikely that they would have remained there to do additional extensive levels of work. So ultimately, since Mass Effect 5 was at the beginning of its development pipeline while Veilguard was heating up, the realistic scenario is that there was probably a very small, finite brain trust of people working on Mass Effect 5. Studio leaders, experienced staff members assigned specifically to the project. Any additional hires made by Bioware would have gone exclusively either to Veilguard or to Mass Effect 5. The idea of this set of employees impacting the project on this side of the board is pretty minimal. The possibility and the reality is that there was probably a little bit of cross-contamination, but common practice usually suggests we keep each set of project resources to the project. To me, that puts to rest the idea that senior staff departing from the Veilguard team means something for Mass Effect 5. But what about those who were probably just excited to have these major writers join Mass Effect 5 after Veilguard launched? Y'all are completely valid in your opinion, and I completely understand why you'd want people who worked on the original series to come back and provide additional content for that series. It would make sense, right? To support the themes, to support the actual feeling of that first set of Mass Effect games. But honestly, like for myself personally, and this is my subjective opinion that you're welcome to disagree with, while these creators' writing did shape the original series and made it what it was, I personally don't believe that their departures are a sign of impending doom for Mass Effect 5. Beyond what we talked about with resource sharing and the project budgets staying completely separate from each other, when you're looking at our most recent experiences with Mass Effect and Dragon Age games, I personally feel like there is more to be desired from the writing. The competition for the RPG landscape has drastically increased with the release of Baldur's Gate 3. Baldur's Gate 3, developed in a relatively short time compared to some of the Bioware games, really showed us that you can have a very personal, very eloquently written RPG experience. And when you compare that writing to the standards set by today's Bioware games, it's hard to say that they stack up. In Veilguard, one of the criticisms was that players felt like their choices didn't matter. If your choices don't matter in an RPG, what is the point? It's not that Veilguard or any of the recent Bioware games are entirely negative experiences. They're not. And even for myself, I love Mass Effect Andromeda despite what the fandom says. But I do believe that it's time to let go of some of the standards of Bioware writing and embrace growth and evolution. It's necessary for Mass Effect and Bioware's writing to evolve and catch up with what is going on in the RPG space all around. We've lived through the last few years of the fantasy RPG boom, and the sci-fi RPG boom is right around the corner. While I am really sad to lose such incredible creators, I understand why Bioware made that decision, and I don't think it was an easy one. But this is all speculation. At the end of the day, I don't know exactly why Bioware chose to remove those roles at all. But Gary McKay, the general manager from Bioware and the one who drafted the studio update that we're talking about now, mentioned in a previous blog post update, in order to meet the needs of our upcoming projects, continue to hold ourselves to the highest standard of quality, and ensure Bioware can continue to thrive in an industry that's rapidly evolving, we must shift towards a more agile and more focused studio. It will allow our developers to iterate quickly, unlock more creativity, and form a clear vision of what we're building before development ramps up. To achieve this, we find ourselves in a position where change is not only necessary, but unavoidable. As difficult as this is to say, rethinking our approach to development inevitably means reorganizing our team to match the studio's changing needs. As part of this transition, we are eliminating approximately 50 roles at Bioware. That is deeply painful and humbling to write. We are doing everything we can to ensure the process is handled with empathy, respect, and clear communication. With that last point in mind, I want to take a moment to explain how we got here, what we're doing to support our colleagues, and what this means for Bioware's current and future games. I will link this blog update in the description. As always, I do a list of all the sources that I use to construct my essays and inform my thinking. So you'll be able to find all that information in the description if you want to read this for yourself. Because he does go on to talk about the what happens immediately and what happens in the future. And I think that is a really good read if you're interested in keeping in touch with what's going on with Bioware. It's hard for me to imagine that cutting down to a team of 100 is a positive change to develop a game of the caliber of a Bioware sequel. I mean, it's a AAA game. Of course, here's where I admit my experience is limited. And I do know that when you have people who are incredibly powerful and talented at their job, you don't necessarily need too many cooks in the kitchen. That is a very real thing to think about. So I guess what I can only say is that removing this amount of roles, in this update particularly it was 50, simply reduces the amount of cooks in the kitchen. It's less voices, less opinions, but it's also less hands on deck. After almost a decade of no hits, it completely makes sense to me that Bioware needs to promise some sweeping changes in order to maintain its relationship with EA. Budgeting is simply just a very real possibility why they can't keep all these folks on anymore. And in an interesting other angle to look at this from too, while not every role in games is compensated extraordinarily well, back in my throat. Folks in more senior roles do tend to have higher compensation. And while higher compensation is great, and I love that, it comes with the other side to it where it becomes more expensive for a studio to retain senior positioned individuals. Some other explanations for why Bioware chose to downsize this way: perhaps these seniors did have expertise that was very relevant for Dragon Age, but maybe not as applicable for Mass Effect 5. Maybe the Veilguard budget was larger than that was approved for Mass Effect 5. It's all speculation. These are just all a number of possibilities and scenarios where some might be true, many might be true, or none might be true. But ultimately, and this is something that's key to understanding how all of this plays together, the meta and narrative for Mass Effect 5 is not solely determined by designers. Meta, narrative, storyline, features, all of this is determined in sequence with each other. Typically, decision-making on a game's direction involves any number of departments from across a game studio, including those execs who are evaluating the game for its potential to return profit. So while it is incredibly frustrating to hear about these beloved writers being let go, remember that there's too much ambiguity and doubt about who is actually involved in the decision-making around Mass Effect 5 to be sure that it makes a difference. We know for sure that in this round of layoffs, we can say that writers, producers, analysts, and system designers were a part of the layoff, but we don't know with full certainty what the rest of that list looks like or the amount of staffing that remains per department. These are all numbers that only Bioware knows. Honestly, while we'll never know the real reasons behind these staff changes, I did want to address them and provide as much context as I possibly could to the possibilities behind them, as well as how they could impact Mass Effect 5. As far as it goes in my assessment on where Mass Effect 5 lies, I've stated before when we went over the project management triangle that I don't believe that time as a variable is something that's going to be changing here. What the change in staffing really impacts is going to be the scope of the project. So when we later go on to talk about where Mass Effect 5 is in development, the staffing changes are only going to factor into what the final product might look like, not when it will come out. What do we know? What do we actually know about Mass Effect 5 at this point? I will show you. Do you see this? It's nothing. Because we know nothing. Because in my opinion, any version of Mass Effect 5 that has existed in the past 5 years has been deconstructed, reconstructed, pulled apart, put back together, zombie stitched up, electrified, and left us with a product that we still completely have no idea what the heck is going on with it. Now, I believe that the Bioware team focused on Mass Effect 5 has stuff. Stuff being game design documents, a prototype, a core gameplay loop or two. Plenty of concept arts for sure. But really, I believe their vision has been shifted drastically in response to layoffs and now most recently, Veilguard's reception. Okay, it's time for a scene change. Woo! Oh my God, it's hot today. All right, what do we actually know about Mass Effect 5? To determine what we actually know, we can draw from two main information sources. One, the teasers, and two, the blog updates. Since we've already spent a ton of time looking at the blog, let's take a look at some of the teasers. Now, we don't have a lot to go off of here. In total, we have about one trailer and a handful of promotional images. Since we're trying to answer the question of where is Mass Effect 5, we're going to be using everything that Bioware has released up till now to determine what we think Bioware actually has when it comes to Mass Effect 5. And to me, the answer is nothing. Well, nothing really. Nothing that we could see right now and expect to be the same by the time it releases. Because in my opinion, any version of Mass Effect 5 that has existed up till now has been reconstructed, deconstructed, and put back together over and over again ever since its inception. And actually, the reason why I think that is the trailer. Funnily enough, the trailer is supposed to be the main source of information of what we know Mass Effect 5 to look like. At least what kind of story we think Bioware wants to tell. Let's take a second and just watch it in full right now. Okay. Wow. Good video, right? Good video. Good content. Good job, Mass Effect team. Mwah. Good job. You have me interested. You have me intrigued. Color me curious. But I'm gonna be so honest, curiosity is all I have here, because what did that trailer tell us? What did that trailer tell us about the actual game they're building? Nothing. Like zip nothing. Now there's a couple of things that you might be feeling after watching that trailer that have you scratching your head like, why is she saying they gave us nothing? Clearly we know Bioware devs are gonna bring back Liara and Shepard, right? And honestly, no, I don't think that that's something that we can confidently say is going to happen. From my point of view, just showing the characters does not really mean that they're gonna actually feature heavily in the game, especially characters like Liara and Shepard. And let me give a little insight as to why I think that. We know that besides Shepard themselves, the other great face of Mass Effect is Liara. When I say face, I mean they're representative of the brand itself. I'd argue that Liara appearing in a teaser trailer as well as the N7 helmet is more of a means to evoke the feeling of the original series and drive hype. Rather than promising that the next game is going to prominently feature Liara and Shepard in some capacity, I think the point of this trailer is more so a rallying call to fans who loved the original feeling of the trilogy. The teaser does not feature gameplay. It doesn't actually show Shepard in some kind of living form or even with their iconic full armor.
So we can't confidently ever say that Shepard is going to be the main player character again, but it is giving us a nod to our favorite memories and experiences with that character. Putting Liara and the N7 symbol in a video together is about the most bare minimum thing you can do to rally fans of the Bioware community. To me, it has about the same lore significance as putting the Mass Effect characters on a Monopoly box. It doesn't tell us much other than this is the kind of vibe and story area that we can expect. I do think that this teaser was a good idea though. Even if it's somewhat vague and doesn't give us a lot of clues as to what we can actually expect from the game, what it does do is it separates the next Mass Effect game from its predecessor, Andromeda. In Andromeda, we know for a fact none of the original characters of the trilogy were significantly involved, only kind of hinted at or mentioned in some dialogues. Actually, I think Liara was pretty much the main character that I can think of that was mentioned in Andromeda. In Andromeda, we only got subtle nods to the original trilogy. It was meant to really stand alone and apart from that first set of 3 games. Now, with this teaser release, I think they're making a concentrated effort to show us that, hey, we are gonna go back to this story in some capacity, but that's all we can really infer from that. So to my main point, I don't think a real complete story is 100% laid down in the sand yet. But I do think that this is the area that they want to play around in, and they wanted to let fans know early, especially given the reception of Andromeda. Now let's dive a little further in for all the real fans out here. Initially, the first thing I thought of when I saw this trailer was that we were back in time. I actually thought that this was a prequel or a callback to a moment within the original trilogy. And there were 2 places I thought we could be calling back to. The first, when Liara recovers Shepard's body for the elusive man. The second, in the aftermath of the Reaper War. Say if your galaxy readiness wasn't high enough or something happened to Shepard and they ultimately didn't survive the war. To me, either one of those scenarios seemed possible. Now, to support the fact that this is happening during the Reaper War, we hear all the calls happening about the mass emergencies and casualties going on across the universe. It's high stakes, there's so much going on. It places us right back in the center of all that drama. When Shepard takes charge and leads the galaxy together to defeat the Reapers once and for all. The other side of the coin is that we see Liara working with what appears to be a group of mercenaries. Now, Liara has always been an independent scientist, but during her time in Mass Effect 1, we know that she primarily worked with Alliance soldiers. In Mass Effect 3, she had her own Shadow Broker troops. And what do we know about the last time that Shepard crashed out of the stratosphere? Well, we know Liara was the one to recover their body. This is, of course, when she turned Shepard over to the elusive man, making them a super soldier for Cerberus. To me, it makes sense that Liara would have either worked with Cerberus soldiers or mercenaries in order to find Shepard's body. Now, both of these ideas, I think, are valid interpretations of when this moment could be set. There is one detail, though, that when I noticed it, I decided to push those theories out the window. If you zoom in on Liara's face, and you don't really have to zoom in that close, one thing is super clear. She has aged. And not to sound like a crazy person analyzing the wrinkles on someone's skin to determine the moment of when a cutscene is taking place, but I am that person and we are doing this. It is significant that in the trilogy, Liara is said to be a very young Asari. She's only crested around 100 years old after all. That's completely different from Asari who have lived thousands of years already and reached matriarch status. Now, it is supernatural to have wrinkles at any age, but I feel like the fact that they gave us such a close glimpse of Liara's face and that detail just stood out like a beacon, it makes me think this has to be happening hundreds of years, centuries even after the Reaper War, but something about that era is coming back. And Liara, being the only one who survives long enough to live to see that, with the exception of folks maybe like Rex and Grunt, is a very compelling opportunity. To me, the theory and the idea that this might take place at least 1,000 years after the Reaper War is super significant.
because it allows Bioware to wipe the slate clean of potential choices that folks would have made during their trilogy playthrough and standardize the canon for another RPG experience to take place. It's very hard when you're accounting for multiple narratives running through different players' playthroughs. A time skip would really help smooth over some of those issues and set us all on the same playing field again to make choices anew. But this might have you asking, why in the world would Shepard's body be discarded in the snow like this? If they survive the Reaper War, wouldn't it make sense that they would go on to live a decorated life, retire, and, I don't know, be buried in some kind of monument somewhere? If they died in the Reaper War, why in the world would they be at this kind of snowy place? After all, if they died, they would have died at the Crucible, which we know was near the Citadel. I think Bioware could probably take creative liberties to explain either of these scenarios away. But when it comes to ultimately determining what the heck this cutscene is, whether it's a flashback hinting towards a prequel, a dream, or an alternate timeline, or even in the future, it's not easy to answer to one of those possibilities. That's because at the end of the day, though we can analyze these details and wonder what in the world is making Liara smile at this moment, the truth is this is a hype video where anything is supposed to be possible. The only thing we can count on is that Mass Effect 5 will be invoking the spirit of the original trilogy. How much the original characters will feature, where it'll actually take place and when, all up for debate and grabs still. Really, what I come to believe as the strongest leading theory is that this is a moment that takes place at least 600 to 1,000 years in the future after the Reaper War. Because, like I said, with the choice endings of the original trilogy, it's so difficult to imagine an immediate sequel anytime in Shepard's lifespan that doesn't totally just obliterate and retcon your player's choices to death. I mean, they'd have to go significantly into the future to soften the erasure of choices made by players in the original trilogy. And specifically using Liara as the character to introduce this teaser makes this world super possible. If we chose Garrus, Tali, or Rex, none of them would have the lifespan to support that kind of future jump. But now I want to go back to one thing. Shepard, or Shepard, ? Posted on N7Day. This poster is an iconic silhouette to a character I don't believe we've seen before. At first glance, we're looking at it and we think, oh, great, Shepard. I know that helmet. Obviously, we have N7 going on here, and that's gotta be the Citadel, right? But I have never seen this silhouette in the game, ever. I think it's very significant that they chose a new art direction to depict what we're expecting to be Shepard. Because while Shepard's armor has evolved over the events of the trilogy, we've never seen it take this shape before. Now we do have some evoking of the original Onyx armor. We can see that it's kind of skin tight, it looks like a wetsuit more than anything, and yet, in contrast to it, we have a cape or trench coat of some kind that lends itself to a stealthier, more mysterious look than that of a regular soldier. And Shepard has always been a soldier. Despite their subclasses, despite their specializations, they have always been represented as a soldier by the mainstream Mass Effect media. This N7 character that we're looking at raises suspicions in me. I look at it and I think future. I don't think Shepard, I think someone new. And that's where my theory comes from, that maybe what we're seeing represented in these Mass Effect 5 hints isn't actually Shepard, but a new N7 character. There's just something about the image and the silhouette of this character that so specifically subverts Shepard's identity. The sleekness, the aura. I really think we are getting a new player character and we are not going to keep playing as Shepard. And honestly, as it should be, in my opinion, it would be too difficult, too time-consuming to ever properly do justice to a player's full Shepard arc from the original trilogy. It would be impossible to do it in this time frame in a way that does justice to a player's experience.
We'd miss so many opportunities for those custom events that your shepherd caused, or didn't cause in some cases. No, a new character, perhaps inspired or created specifically to contrast the original shepherd, that makes a lot of sense to me. Honestly, you have just as good a shot at guessing what the heck this means by closing your eyes and throwing a dart at a spinning board. All of the speculation that we can do right now is just another indicator that we don't know what the solid and real story is going to be in Mass Effect 5. And finally, just to go back to the blogs for a brief moment, I think looking at them bolsters the argument that nothing is set in stone yet. We've seen two main allusions to Mass Effect 5 through the Bioware blogs. The first blog was posted after the 2020 Game Awards, where they first dropped the Mass Effect 5 teaser trailer. This was the first time they ever acknowledged that the next Mass Effect game was in production. And to be able to have dropped a cinematic trailer, they'd have to have been developing for at least a year. In my mind's eye, at least. It takes time to put together a trailer, and it takes even more time to decide upon what's going to be in the trailer and what the game is actually going to be all about. So we're guessing that the game started development somewhere around 2019. The next point in the timeline for Mass Effect 5's development came with a blog update in 2023, N7Day. In this blog update, they basically just reminded us that Mass Effect 5 is on its way. It's still coming, even if we'll have to wait a little longer for it. They did some great little teaser imagery around here that I'll have linked so you can check it out for yourself. But at the long and short of it, that's it. That's literally all. Now it's not much, but these two updates does build a timeline. And in combination with the most recent developments, I think that this puts Mass Effect 5 right about in middle production land. Now, what the heck does this mean? Let me break it down for you. You'll have to stay tuned and find out in part 2. Like I prefaced in the beginning, I did intend to have all of this wrapped up into one video, but as you can probably see by the timestamp at this point, I absolutely had to break it into 2 parts because one video would have been too much information to reasonably digest for any viewer. Also for myself, it would have been majorly confusing to organize and even more so to edit. I'll be releasing part 2 within the next few weeks, so make sure to hit that subscribe bell and get ready. Or you could not do that, but honestly, I already wrote the video and it's gonna come out like literally whether or not you're here. So like, why not stick around, right? Till then, please get me out of this echo chamber and prison of my brain. And tell me, what is everybody thinking? What was everybody's response initially to the Bioware update? And do we have any like new opinions or thoughts now? Are you encouraged? Are you discouraged? How are you feeling about the future of Mass Effect? Cause like me, I'm gonna need a little bit of emotional support and wisdom from my good old Elcor friend here. So Mr. Elcor, please tell me some wisdom. All right, well, at least somebody's happy. Till next time, friends, we are going to need not just a little bit of luck in our pockets, but we're gonna need a whole handful, lot of it. Bye.